Okay, welcome back. This is number 2 in the series of proper reading or deep reading or academic reading. I don't know what I'll end up calling it, but anyway, reading. So the first video I set this up, talked about a few kind of key elements. So if you just come into this one, make sure you go back and watch the first one first. Where we left off was I was going to talk about strategizing. It's a weird one, right? People, when I talk about this to my undergrads and less so with postgrads, but it's still something that they have to work on anyway. When I talk about reading and strategy and planning, at first people are like, what are you on about? I mean, most of my time at university is revolving around people looking at me going, what are you on about? But this is even more so the case, because people just think that they can just read, and I just don't think it's the case for most people. There's some people who, yeah, they're fine. They read, they take it in, they write. Fine. I'm not talking to them. If you're one of those people, switch off, go and get first. I'm talking to the rest of us who are normal. So for me, one of the big jumps that happened for me when I started to get good at reading and good at writing was when I got scared about not being able to finish my PhD, which was daft, but nevertheless, it was quite useful because it made me put my mind to what I was doing. And for me, having a background in sport, and this is why this is quite useful for a lot of the students that I teach who do sports science degrees, you can apply basic periodization and basic planning to it for a training. And imagine it's training. You know, how would you plan a week of training now? We'll do that with your writing. So some basic levels of stuff that you need to do to be able to achieve that. But that metaphor works quite well for them. And it's something to think about for yourself. You know, everyone's done some exercise at some point. You know a bit about like doing some each day and trying to build up and knowing what you're good at and bad at and all that sort of stuff. You apply that to reading. It's one of those skills like writing and also speaking in public that people just think they can do. Right? You can write, you can spell, right? You can read a word, and you can speak. But can you do them well? Can you do them in public? Can you do them at a high level? Can you do them and get peer reviewed and pass the peer review? Like that's a different level of those things. So that's the same with reading. I think you need strategy and plan to do that. So the first thing is, another problem that I have with students is I talk to them about time blocking and planning their work. And when I look at their time blocking, their planning, it just says reading, like 3 hours, 2 hours before lunch or whatever. And it's like, what are you reading? For what reason are you reading it? How much are you supposed to read? Where's your breaks? What are you trying to get out of it? None of that. It's just reading. So you've no endpoint. Like, I'm just going to read my book today. Now, that's fine if you're having a day off and you're just going to chill on a bank holiday and read your book. Go for it. We're not doing that. We're doing work. So you'd never just turn up at like your normal work and just go, right, I'm just working. So well, what are you doing at work? You're doing a thing. So you do that with reading. So when I kind of speak to students about this, I'm like, okay, you can't just say I'm reading today because there's no finish point. And if there's no finish point, you always fail, right? You can't see a finishing point. Now, it's fine if you put a finishing point and you don't reach it. Okay, well, now we can assess that and we can rethink about it. And we can say what should have been a reasonable target. But at the same time, if you have a finishing point, you finish. Great. Go to the pub, do something else, go and whatever, watch Netflix. So that's the first point, is to think about this a little bit more than just reading. So what are you doing? First off, what levelness are you doing? Do you need to really comprehend this because you're writing it for a book chapter or a paper? Or is it background reading for your whole study? Okay, right, well, that's serious reading. That's not picking facts and figures out. That's proper. And that's the sort of thing that you've got to give yourself time for, because you can't allow yourself to phase in and phase out. You need to read every single word accurately in that paper. So that might be one paper for the whole morning or even the whole day, depending on where you are in your academic kind of abilities and development. So you have to think about what you're trying to do. So once you've got that, you can now think about it in an overarching sense if you want. So I've got the summer, and now I'm speaking to my undergraduate students who have got the summer, and they've got to read a certain amount of papers, or I would suggest they should read a certain amount of papers before they come back in October for their dissertations. Great. So let's say 50. Let's pick a number out, which is a number that I always say to my students at the third year. Read 50 papers, because it's a big number, but it's not unachievable. Okay, considering you've got a bit of time off for the summer, let's say we've got 10 weeks, 50 papers, split into 10, 5 papers a week. Okay, cool. 1 a day, maybe 2 a day for the first 2 days, and then one more, and then 2 days off, plus the weekend. Great. Whatever. You get to the end of that time, you've got 50 papers read. Now, at undergraduate level, that's great. That sets you up really well. Now, for the rest of us, wherever we work in, whatever discipline, you've got your own details of that to figure out. But it's still doable. And when I hear people, especially academics who are overworked and stuff, who struggle to find the time for reading, I also find they don't tend to give themselves that time blocked moment to sit and do some reading, to block it out. It is challenging to do when you're kind of overworked and whatnot, but at the same time, a lot of academic overwork is about taking things on that we don't need to take on. So if you value reading as a central part of your job, you'll look at your week and go, well, I've got to read for 4 hours each day or whatever. So I can't do this review for you, and I can't go for that promotion because I've got something else that I want to do, and I can't do that project with you because I've got this to do. And you get your priorities organized. Now, for me, after my students, my personal priority is reading so I can write the next book. That's it. That's what I'm doing at the minute. And then after that will be the next one. So anything that gets in the way of that, I just basically say no to. So I know it sounds overly simplistic, granted, but it's something that I think people can work towards. So we have to kind of carve out what we've got to do, how we've got to do it, set a time limit. There's your plan, go. Just execute it. Got to read a paper today, right, go. Got to read another paper tomorrow, go. If that's too much, then you reflect on it. But without the process of looking at what you've got to do and how you've got to do it, you can't reflect on the process and change it. Okay, the next one. Because you've now got a target, you can hit it. Once you've hit it, stop. Leave yourself something in the tank. Jenny, my partner, wife, said to me the other day about reading and working is always finish knowing exactly what you're going to do the next day. It's a great bit of advice. So don't go like, right, I'm reading today. Oh, I've finished. I've got a bit of time off. I'll do that next bit. Just leave that next bit for tomorrow. And your brain in the subconscious is thinking about it. You're preparing for it. You're ready. You know what to do. You wake up, you do it. And then the same again the day after. Because if you just have and this is the same with marking essays, I can blitz through loads and loads of essays in one day, but I'm blown out the next day. Much better to do a few and leave something in the tank. You see the training metaphor coming through. One training session, one really hard training session is nowhere near as good as 3 over the course of the week where you can recover from them. Yeah, so next we have to think again about the training metaphor. When are you best at it? So for me, quite simple. My best reading is probably first thing in the morning. I'm basically shot at night. I wake up really early. I'm not one of those horrific early risers who just wakes up naturally at 5. But that gives me a couple of hours before, the street gets busy and people are emailing me and whatever. So I can walk the dogs, I can do a bit of reading, and I get a lot of it out of the way that way. So when are you good at reading? A lot of people don't know when they're good at reading. I asked that of my third year students, second year actually, when I do research methods with them. And they don't know. And why would they? Because they wouldn't think about it in those terms. But once you can figure out when you're good at it, you can start to balance your day a little bit more, and you can check it and you can find out, okay, I've got to read, well, I better not leave it till the evening because that's when I can't concentrate. And at that point, you do your emails or some other stuff that you don't need to concentrate on. So think about that. And then once you've got where you're good at it, time block it, set your week up, set the moments where you're going to do the reading flexibly. You don't have to be like a slave to it, but flexibly, right, there's my time for that. Go. Again, it's about setting the plan and then just executing it. Again, treat it like a training program. If you're a novice, and what I've been talking about, and I'm not a novice at reading. I've been reading since I was 6. Yeah, whatever. I'm talking about if you're a novice at deep academic reading, which is hard, which should be a drain on your emotional and your cognitive abilities. If you're not used to doing that, then don't think that you're going to do much more than 20 minutes the first time you do it. And if you think you are doing, you're probably not getting deep enough. So with that in mind, set yourself some really achievable targets to begin with. So for my third year students, set yourselves half an hour and then a break and then another half an hour and then a longer break. Do that. See how much you get through. For academics, it's still the same thing. If you're struggling with it, then you've got to set maybe some harder goals, but you've still got to set it. If you find yourself not getting through that reading, you've got to do it in the same way. You just start at a different place. And then once you've got that baseline, you can reflect on it. I'm talking through literally what I've done to do this, and then I push it. Okay, so I read this paper I really didn't want to read, but I had to. and I could really not concentrate for much more than 20 minutes. But I did it again after a break, and I did it again, and I got through it. Okay, week after, 30 minutes, and build it up and build it up. Once you get into reading stuff that's a pleasure, this all goes out the window, because you reading papers are a pleasure, that's fine. But when we're talking about reading stuff that we don't want to read, that's where this kind of really comes in. And if you're starting to struggle, notice it. Don't give yourself too much shit. Just, okay, I'm struggling with this. Refresh, do something else for a bit, come back to it. And you've got to remember, I'm not talking about casual reading. I'm talking about reading that really does drain you. So you've got to be aware of that. Then what's the best way? So we've got the times. What's the best way? So for me, in the house, I've got a nice little open plan little space where I can read. It's nice and quiet. Lots of light comes in. Bang, I'll get loads done first thing in the morning. But then if I need to keep reading, which I tend to not have to, I build my day so that I don't have to read in the afternoon, then unfortunately, it's probably not the best behavior, but I read in the pub because there it feels like a treat. Okay, I'm out in the pub. I get to read my book. I get to read a couple of papers, a couple of pints, helps me stay focused on the thing that I'm reading. And it's a different environment. So I almost get a new lease of life. Sound like an alcoholic. I get a new lease of life when I'm in the pub reading. It's like, right, let's go again. And I can get through loads again. Phone with some music on so that people don't bother me, because I know loads of people in the pub and they'll come and talk to me. And as soon as my headphones are on, they just leave me to it. I also, just one more tip, I have a limit of how much I can drink when I do that. Usually 2 pints is a sweet spot. Once I've had 2 pints and I go for my third, I know that I've not got much longer left of reading, so I have to stretch that out. But anyway, that's me. Maybe you're fine with 10 pints or whatever. But it doesn't have to be booze. I should highlight that. It doesn't have to be, you figure it out your own way, but figure it out what it is. There's a coffee shop for you or whatever. Go into a different room. Okay. The other side of that then is to think about when reading is not going well. When you're in a bad cycle, when can you not even think about doing it? Oh, I've got to read this thing. I mean, that's terrible. We don't want that, but it has to sometimes happen that we have to force through that. But what you have to do is recognize it and do something about it. All right, so I'm reading this book. I don't like it. Whatever, I'm reading it. I don't like it. I don't want to read it. It's massive and thick and it's boring. Okay, I'm just going to read 5 pages because I know I can read 5 pages. Just do a thing. All right, done 5 pages. Let's leave it. Well, actually, I got to the end of the 5 pages and it wasn't that bad. So I did 10. Great, well done. Now I have a break and start again. But you can't recognize you're in a bad cycle unless you do this process of reflecting on your plan and reflecting on some sort of system and seeing that you're not achieving it. Once you're there, you can start to reflect on it in more detail. Don't get disappointed if you're not able to do it how you expect, right? I had a meeting with a PhD dissertation student this year who was working really hard and doing really good, and she wasn't hitting the goals that she set for herself. And she was like, really upset. I'm not doing what I thought. I'm like, yeah, but this is what you are doing. So you're doing all of this, and you're not doing that. What's the problem? That you're doing this, which is fine. Keep doing this and don't be concerned about that. So just be aware of what your expectations are. Reset them if you push yourself too far and you're expecting too much from yourself. I think everyone just expects that they can read really well. Just don't expect to not understand stuff. And then once you get that, you can work through the stuff that I'm talking about and it makes a lot more sense. All right, a few other bits just to wind up this section, this video of the series. So what's the best environment? So the way I think about this is music. So I've already mentioned that I listen to music when I read. And I've 2 or 3 different types of music that I can read to really effectively, usually somewhat hypnotic and without any vocals. That's the way in which it kind of works for me. And it helps me get into a kind of a quote unquote zone. What is it for you? Is it complete silence? I don't know. But broadly speaking, what's the environment? So if you've got kids, how are you going to shut them away? How are you going to lock them up somewhere so they can't bother you? If you've got a dog that's a pain, what are you going to do? Like, you're just going to let it be a pain because that will ruin your reading. So you've got to do a thing. So what is it that you're going to do to set your environment up? So you need to know what the environment is best and then how to achieve it. If you don't do that, expect to fail. Have Google open. You've got to have Google open, but you've got to be strong and not go on social media, right? It's 20 minutes or 30 minutes. You've got to have Google open because there's going to be words that are written daft, academic lingo and stupid bits of undefined Latin and words that are just not normal that people throw in, academics throw in, without care for their readers. That's happens, right? I hate it. You probably hate it. We should stop doing it. And I'm making a kind of moral crusade against it. But that doesn't stop the fact that it happens. So you need Google Open so that you can look at what the meaning is, so you can make sense out of it. And you need your notes so that you can make sense out of that as well. And you may have your notes on your computer, but it has to just be Google and a Word document. And your notifications have to be off and your phone has to be off or away. And you have to kind of do that process. And this is where that idea of doing 20-minute, 30-minute blocks of really disciplined, deep reading is important, because you can do that. Whereas most of my undergraduate students and postgraduate students, they've grown up with social media much more than I did. So their go-to is to be distracted and to be like quickly like, oh, bing, bing, something's happened. I've got a like on Tinder or whatever crazy shit people do these days. So you need to control social media, but you can't be isolated from the world, because you need the world of Google and the rest of it to be able to understand. You need to be able to look at the paper that they've referenced and say, oh, right, I need to get that paper and save it. Okay, I've saved the paper to read later, back to my book. You need to be disciplined with it. So with that as well, you probably need to reflect on how disciplined you were in that process. And you get through your 20, 30 minutes of reading, and you think, right, okay, did I do that well? Was I focused? Give yourself a mark out of 10 and try and beat it. And then the final one for this session, for this video, is finding flow. It happens more regularly to me now than it ever did, where I find myself in a flow of reading, and it's amazing, and I just enjoy it. And that's largely because I only read now for stuff that I want to write about. I don't do any work on research that I'm not interested in. All the projects that I supervise are connected to my work and I'm interested in. So it's very easy for me to find flow, because I'm being creative when I read. I'm intellectually stimulated and I'm into it. That's not the case for a lot of reading that happens for younger people who have to get a degree or a master's or whatever, and they have to read stuff they're not interested in. Still, it's a target. It's something you can be aware of, and the time starts to move slowly or fast, whichever it is for you. And you can look at some of the research on flow in sports, which is quite useful for understanding this. And the goal is, once you recognize you're in flow, try not to think too much about it, because you'll pull yourself out again, but roll with it. Once you're in that, go with it. It's a little bit of a tricky one. You have to take my advice here with a pinch of salt, but I found myself in places with reading where I've then rolled with it and not stopped all day for weeks, and just embedded myself in it, to the point where I won't do as much exercise as maybe I would. I won't eat as healthily, and I'll accept that burden, physical burden, to allow myself to kind of get that flow in reading for a bit. I think it's a good trade-off. Because once I've done that kind of deep reading for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, I can then pull myself out. I've got the work, I can start writing it up, and I can get back focused into looking after my health again. So, and it's the same for undergraduates in their final year. People do push hard in the final year. They will work for 10 plus hours. We have to be careful, of course, advising people to do that. And I'm certainly not advising it. But once it's happening and it feels good and it's working, it's getting things done, I think you'd be daft to pull out of that myself. But take that with a pinch of salt. As I said, I'm not a mental health professional. But once it's going well, I see that, go with it. Dip your bread, as they used to say. All right. Okay. As usual, any questions, drop me a note. Any comments? I'd like to know if you think I'm wrong. Let me know. Please let me know, because I can refine my thinking always. And I'll set up the final video, and I'll probably won't record that today. So, I'll make sure I've got nice curly hair for that one, so I'll look a bit different. All right, see you later.